Welcome back to the Vapes4Vets podcast. Today I was joined by Rick Rains. It was a great interview. We talked about his usage of cannabis for helping treatment as a physical therapist, his time in the military. Um, he's a part of Peachtree NORML. It's a great organization. I think you're going to like this podcast, and as always, check in as releasing new podcasts weekly. How's it going, Rick Rains?
Going great. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Thank you for taking the time to come on the podcast today. And like I was saying, I was reading your bio, and it sounds like you got quite an interesting story.
Yeah. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I kind of grew up here in the belly of the beast of prohibition down here in Georgia. Live about an hour south of Atlanta. Grew up in a mill town here. Our town was a bustling town, back in the 70s, 80s, 50s on back. So we had BF Goodrich and Thomaston Mills here, so we had a vibrant economy. And really, my story starts. It's a story of two veterans, my father and myself. My dad, he served in World War II, and he did the island hopping thing through the Pacific, killing Japanese and trying not to get killed by Japanese. And he served over there for 4 years, and fortunately, a lot of his correspondence was saved in my family. Letters back home. It's called V-mail. So I've had a chance to read those, and it's quite an interesting story about what he and those guys went through over there. Didn't have a lot of food sometimes, it's tough. And when he came back home, he tried different jobs, insurance, settled on house painting because he had this thing about being able to mix colors and see colors, and being able to just do it offhand. But he had a dark secret. His PTSD just overwhelmed him, and even as a young kid, I knew something was wrong. I could tell there just wasn't something right, and he was drank incessantly, and it's a very violent man. So I grew up in that kind of environment, and it was for me. I always knew there was something that wasn't right with me, and I couldn't understand what it was. It was like trying to keep a secret all the time, and that's what happens when you grow up in a a dependent environment like that. When I was a teenager, a friend of mine introduced me to marijuana, and I remember one night after one of the first few times I smoked, I was walking home, and I didn't feel bad anymore. And usually when I was walking home, I would think, what am I going to find when I get home? I was all nervous, but this time I wasn't. I didn't care. It didn't matter so much. And when I got home that night, he was sleeping, and I went to sleep. It's probably one of the best night's sleeps I can ever remember having. And and I thought about that later on, and I kept using cannabis and cutting back on my alcohol use, and then when I went into the military, of course I had to stop, because they will test you pretty randomly, and so for years I went without that, and then when I got out of the military, and I became more active, because I was a member of, I joined NORML right out of high school in 1976. I knew something was really good with the plant. I understood I had an affinity for that, but I didn't know why. That's before all Raffy's research came out about our endocannabinoid system and how that all works. So at an early age, in my teens, I experienced the medicinal properties. I didn't know what it was. I didn't really understand it. But and so as I got older, I began to understand it and research it. And my dad, and I thought about it. He died when he was my age from kidney failure and liver failure from alcohol use. And that war killed him just as sure as if he had been shot by a sniper over there. It just happened 43 years later. He tried to medicate himself and chose the wrong medication, unfortunately. And that implication of that substance use and all just it brought that to the forefront for me of what's really going on here. If my dad is a veteran, and all those other veterans come back from World War II, we were in war for 4 years. And if that's the kind of trauma it can cause, I can't imagine what our veterans today are going to be facing. We've been at war for what now? 15, 16 years, and these veterans are coming home, and and I can't imagine. And we didn't have as many people serve during those 4 years, but we've had a lot of people, in multiple tours. I just don't understand. I was in Korea for about 18 months, and, was up on the DMZ, patrolling up on the DMZ, and I can't imagine these kids going over there and these young men going over there and doing 4 tours. It's got to be, there's got to be a lot that's going to happen in the future. I was listening to a guy talk about our healthcare system because I'm really interested in that as a part of it. And he told me that the peak of the World War II veteran VA usage, so these are World War II veterans now, was in 1980. That was the peak. So if you extrapolate those numbers, our peak's going to be in 2035, 2040 with the veterans we've had serving in the last 10 years, So we've got to get ahead of this curve because we're losing veterans too quickly.
Yeah, the
So that's how I got
daily
kind of
numbers
involved in
are.
that. Yeah, in 22, I attended the International Cannabis Research Conference in Colorado in March. I took my physician out there with me, my primary care physician, so he could see the science. Hopefully, they'll become a recommender here because we have very few of them here in Georgia. So, but we have a number, but not in this area. So, but anyway, and I went to the NORML 22 presentation by Clay Bell, and those numbers are low, 22 a day. If you were less than honorably discharged, which a lot of these guys with TBIs were, you don't count. If you drank alcohol and overdosed and died, they count it as an overdose, not a suicide. So those numbers are skewed. So we believe there's quite a few more than 22 a day that are dying, and that's unacceptable.
After your experiences with your father, was it a hard decision to join the military?
No. All my family had been in the military. All my uncles, as a matter of fact, my uncle Thomas was shot down over Germany and died a few weeks before the war ended. He was in a hospital there, and people saw him while he was still alive. But I think the Germans killed everyone in the hospital as they were retreating. So he died there, and I had 2 other uncles that served. So, and I had friends that served, and it was kind of a thing for me. There's this little small town here. I wanted to get out and travel some, so that's why I decided to do that.
What was your trade in the military?
I was a Cavalry Scout, 19 Delta. I went to basic training in Fort Knox, left Fort Knox, and fortunately came back here to the 17th Cavalry Regiment at Hunter Army Airfield. We were attached to the 75th Ranger Battalion, so we got to move around a lot. And about a year after that, I was sent to Korea. I asked to go to Germany, so he sent me to Korea, and that's the last time I asked for anything. But and so Korea was a lot of fun. It was different. There was a lot of good flying over there. You can do some things over there that you can't do here in the States. So, it was pretty fun.
Were you deployed there during the conflict?
No. I was there in 1980 and 81.
Okay.
I don't know if you remember when the Korean airliner was shot down by the Russians with one of our senators from Georgia on board. I was there when that happened. That was back in the 80s. That's been a pretty good while ago.
So obviously you were doing flying, but so the DMZ it's constantly manned by U.S. soldiers, South Korean soldiers. Any other countries involved there?
Yeah, it's just the North Koreans, South Koreans, and us. Some British soldiers come through from time to time. They'll do operations with us from time to time up there. And it's just a ceasefire there. It's not. People think the war's over. Well, it's just a ceasefire. It's not. They have to sign no peace agreements or anything with North Korea. So it's constantly, people are shooting at you and trying to, come across the border. So, and they send spies across, and our job was just sit up there and monitor the border.
You're sorry, you cut out there. You're there to kind of find the spies before they cross.
Yeah, and look for tunnels. They're constantly tunneling under there, so to get supplies and spies back and forth and information back and forth. So, and families come back and forth that way too.
How big are these tunnels they're digging? Are they big enough to move tanks and?
Well, they found one after I left that was big enough to put a company through every 10 minutes, and that's 300 people that could get through this tunnel in about every 10 minutes. So some of them pretty good size.
Wow.
Of course, with the new technology now, being able to geo map under the ground, they're not as prevalent as they used to be.
How many soldiers usually posted along the DMZ?
Gosh, there's probably, I was at Camp Casey, and there were about 3,000 of us there, 3,500 of us there at that time. And we would rotate. We would go back to a forward rear base for 2 weeks, and then come back up for 2 weeks. We had teams that would do that. So give us a little break and give us time to do maintenance on our equipment and everything. So,
well, it's all.
It's really, when they take you up there, they put you in this room and it goes dark. You can't see anything. You can feel the people around you because you're crowded in this room. And all of a sudden, the lights come on, and it's a circular room with 8 to 10 foot pictures of our troops there in '76 that went to cut a tree down. There was a tree near this bridge, and it was blocking our view. And some Koreans went out there with 3 Americans, and they were going to cut the tree down. And the North Koreans came across the bridge and hacked the Americans to death with machetes. And they had film of all this, so they have pictures of it. And it's on the wall around you, so it kind of gives you, a little validation as to why you're there, So it was a unique experience I've never experienced, and that there's a narrator there that tells you about that. And then you get to go out, and you go out actually to the where the truce was signed. You get to go in that room, and then they let you. Korean guards go out the back door, lock the door, and then you get to walk around the table into North Korea. So I've been into North Korea. Well, it was across the table, but anyway, and you come back through, and they let you see all that. So, the military, I have to give them credit. They in Korea, they educate you as to why you're there doing what you're doing, so that you can understand it.
You constantly got to be aware and possibly nervous that they could just all come charging across at once, eh?
Well, yeah, we knew. Well, we knew if anything really happened, we were pretty much not going to be there anymore because the North Koreans have enough artillery on and behind the DMZ to completely just put a round every 2 meters, an artillery shell every 2 meters up and down the DMZ. So, if anything came down and they initiated that artillery, I mean, it was just a matter of time. There wouldn't be much we could do about it except try to get out of there, bug out. And that's why that's why we have to be very careful, even this day, in this day and age. If something's, sparked from the DMZ, Seoul and most of northern South Korea would be it'd be bad, really bad.
Do you mind telling us like a mission or two that you're a part of?
Well, we would go out routinely, and we would get in the OH-58 helicopters, scout helicopters, and we would patrol up and down through there. I never really, we were shot at frequently, but, I never saw anybody, getting killed or anything like that. But, when you go up there, you realize, it could happen. It's just one of those things. And, that obviously, we have restraint, and fortunately, when the time I was there, the North Koreans exercised some restraint too. They killed 3 or 4 people coming across about a week before I left, and it wasn't too far from our post. They were trying to get across with some arms. Of course, we had one of our soldiers defect that were there while I was there. So,
did you say defect?
Eventually came back. We had one of our soldiers defect while I was there. So.
What does that mean?
He went over to North Korea. He just walked, put his arms down, and just walked over across the border. He obviously had some psychological issues, and as a matter of fact, they sent him back. So I don't think they wanted any part of him either.
I shouldn't be laughing, but it's
well, yeah. Well,
yeah.
Those are the kind of people you want to get back out of the way, because you don't want them up there with you, and you can't trust. You just when you're carrying arms and stuff, you just want to make sure you can trust the people around you, as we've learned in Afghanistan and in the Middle East. Too tragically, sometimes the people around you, if you don't know who they are, you don't know their motives, it's bad to have to look on both sides of you. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. But I actually enjoyed my time in Korea. I learned a lot while I was there, and it was mission oriented, and we had a very interesting time there. My cavalry unit came back after that, and I came back to Fort Campbell, Kentucky. And then when I got ready to get out of the military, one of my counselors told me, he said, this physical therapy thing, it's the next thing, there's a big shortage. So I got into that, and if I could find that guy now, I'd buy him a case of beer, because he certainly sent me in the right direction career-wise.
So it was shortly after you got back from your tour that you made the switch to physical therapy?
Yeah, yeah, I did that. I was in a rapid deployment force, and I was married at the time, and I just got tired of moving every 2 years. Some people like that, but I'm not like that. I like to travel, but when you have to pull up your family and move every 2 years, it kind of got old to me, and I didn't think I wanted to do that for another 20 years. So I've always enjoyed sports and weight training and stuff. So physical therapy was kind of a natural outlet for me. So.
And what's that training and schooling like?
Yeah, it's pretty competitive. I mean, we started out with 60 candidates, and we had 3 interview sessions, and they eventually picked 20 people for the program. So it's competitive. It's competitive to get into.
Now, was that paid for by the military, or was this through just civilian?
It was actually. When I was in the military, we had a program called VEEP, Veterans Educational Assistance Program, and for every $1 I put in, they matched it with $3. So I'd put in $100 out of my paycheck, and then they would put in $300. So it paid pretty much for my schooling. So.
Well, that's fantastic. That's a nice benefit.
Yeah. But and I've always been interested, like I said, in physical activity. As a matter of fact, when I was in high school, and I was running after I got out of high school, I started running with my brother-in-law. That was back during the running craze in the 70s, and Jim Fix wrote his book and everything. I ended up running a few marathons, but I'd smoke cannabis. I wouldn't use alcohol after I got through, and I noticed the next day I wouldn't hurt as much, and that was another thing. I didn't know why that was. I didn't understand the anti-inflammatory aspects of CBD or anything. They were just now publishing those. Rafi and Israel at that time was just publishing these things, and I had no access to that, of course, so I didn't understand it. I just knew it worked. And when I worked in the textile mills, I knew a lot of people who used it that had really repetitive jobs, like stacking stuff and moving things, just repetitive, and they were having these injuries, and when they would use cannabis, they much more able to adapt to that and work, And I should have recognized that. But I just didn't know what the chemical compound was, Sometimes things just click after a while, and humans have known that for thousands of years. Now we have the science, Now we have the science. That's what I'm so excited about.
Well, what are some of the benefits besides you'd mentioned the anti-inflammatory effect? What other things for physical injuries does cannabis help with?
Well, really, the biggest thing, and the thing I preach to patients is sleep. We repair our bodies when we're asleep. That's when most of the repair goes on when you're asleep. And if you can't get good quality sleep, you don't physically repair your body. And if you don't get into the REM, then you don't repair your mind, which is the really important thing. For your thoughts to be able to recharge your mind. So it helps in both of those respects, I think, and now we're just beginning to understand why. We've targeted the CB1 receptors in the brain. We're looking at those mechanisms and those enzymes and how the cannabis actually works in the brain. And that's very exciting to me, I think. It's the next big thing.
How long after, when you became a physical therapist, did you start to move towards cannabis as a better approach than the pharmaceutical?
It's really been only in the last 6 or 7 years. With me, I always knew that it was better than alcohol, and certainly better than a lot of prescription drugs. And we're trained that way. Doctors are trained that way. That's why it's so hard to get doctors on board because, number one, they've got a license, well, actually, number one, it's a Schedule I drug. That's where everything starts. That's the elephant in the room. And number two, since they can't prescribe Schedule I drugs, they're hesitant to recommend things. But and they have a license because it's a Schedule I drug, and so it makes them nervous. And that's why I've always been amazed that more doctors are not on board. But I live in the Southeast. I've been out west. I've been to most of the legal states. I haven't been to Alaska yet and D.C. yet, but I've been to the other states, talked to the doctors. I started doing that about 7 or 8 years ago to try to get an idea of what's going on. Of course, being on social media, you can connect with people a lot better. And I was really excited about those properties, and I knew they existed, from my own personal experience. How it helped me heal my mind from my dad, and how it healed my body from running and weight training. I knew that stuff instinctively, but I didn't have the science. And so about 6 or 7 years ago, I started seeing these surveys and of people and then they would do studies and they draw blood. And I read a book about 2 years ago that really changed my whole outlook on life. It's called Childhood Disrupted by Donna Jackson Nakazawa. And if I could just for a minute share you what that's about, because I think this all ties in together.
Please do.
This book was written for people like me and people who have grown up in abusive backgrounds. And there's a simple 10-question questionnaire at the beginning of the book. It's called an ACE score, ACE, Adverse Childhood Experiences, and there's 10 questions. And if you score 3 or below, you're not in much danger of anything. If you get up into 5 or 4, you can start seeing some health problems associated with the experience you had as a child. Anything above 4 is kind of a danger, and mine, out of a possible score of 10, mine was a 7. This survey came about by an insurance company, one of the few insurance companies I really respect, is Kaiser Permanente, because they have a patient and a prevention-based model the way they run their insurance company. They believe if you don't get sick, then they save money, which makes sense. But anyway, they were doing a study on obese women because they were having so much usage, from these patients. So they did a 100-question survey, and they put it in the computer, and they were looking at their illnesses, the diagnosis. So this is like 5,000 women, and things begin to line up. And of the morbidly obese women, or women who had long-term problems with their weight, 97.3% of them had suffered childhood sexual abuse. Those numbers just lined up. And when they saw that, they said, uh-oh, this is... And they began to interview these patients. These patients began to break down and tell them what had happened. And then they were able to, to get these people the help they needed, to change their perspective on what had happened to them and to begin to live a healthier lifestyle. But then they began to find other correlations. Guys that had sexual abuse were having increased rates of prostate cancer. They went ahead and started interviewing men too. And this was just groundbreaking. If you're interested in it, you can look it up on the web. It's just Google your ACE score, ACE score, and it'll take you to the website, and you can take the test, and there's a lot of information. But that's, to me, that was kind of what welded the psychological trauma, physical trauma, the mediation of cannabis by both of those two. You could see how that lines up. For me, it was an epiphany for me. It's like, yeah, that's what animals do, and not just people. Monkeys, they'll eat these little worms, and they're hallucinogenic. If they get hurt or they get in a fight, they'll seek out roots, roots with medicinal properties. They'll go out into nature and find what they need. Jaguars, they love to chew on the cannabinoid vines at ayahuasca. One of the principles of that, they chew on that root, and they say the jaguars like it. It helps them trip out, and it helps them hunt better and everything. So animals do this naturally. And this is a natural response to any kind of trauma. And so that's why I find cannabis so useful. And it's almost a miracle, because it not only helps with the psychological problems that people have, it helps with the physical problems. And I think we're just now beginning to understand why we have such an affinity for the plant, But I would, anybody that has, especially veterans, the ACE4, ACE is different from PTSD. The thing with ACE is, when you grow up in an environment like that, your flight or fight syndrome, that mechanism in your amygdala, in that part of your brain, stays on all the time. That's the way we are. We have that. We're just simmering like a pot, and that's why sometimes we have short tempers and things too. But with PTSD, it's usually episodic. You're fine for a while, then something triggers it. You have the same type of response, but it's not constant. Now, a lot of people have both, and I consider myself to have both. And but so it's important to know the difference between the two, just for your own sake, because then that helps you with some behavioral strategies that you can use. But the common factor is cannabis helps both. And that's what we're really pushing for. I'm the veterans coordinator for Peachtree NORML, and we're going to start working on some programs to get some veterans together and get out there and talk to our representatives, because these people, they volunteered to go. They didn't get drafted. They volunteered to go into this, and they deserve our care. They deserve our care, but they have to understand what's going on with them to begin with. You have to know the route before you can, plan your strategy out. So,
I want to hear this from the view of a doctor, the process for prescribing medical marijuana.
And it's different. The different laws are subtle in different states, but here in Georgia, we're fortunately, we have some really, really good activists here in Georgia. We're, like I said, we live on the buckle of the Bible Belt here, so we have strong law enforcement, strong church community, religious communities here, and they're, for the most part, opposed to it until one of them gets sick and they need it, which is what happened here in Georgia. A prominent Republican senator, Alan Peake from Macon, one of his constituents' child has Ravert syndrome, and the child's having 100 seizures a day some days. And they just took off to Colorado, and then the child had like one seizure a week, and now it's like one a month. And so Alan saw that, and they were friends, so he saw what happened, so he began investigating that, and we got a medical marijuana bill here in 2014. It didn't pass, but in 2015, we got more people on board because these people were seeing what was going on, and we have a Republican-dominated, conservative-dominated legislature here in Georgia. But those kids were getting helped, and so they understand it as medicine. But if things move at a glacial pace in the South, that's just the way it is down here. And so we got an oil bill. The oil bill says, it's less than 5% THC. But the problem is we don't cultivate cannabis here in Georgia, and we do not allow the processes here. That will require a change in our Constitution. So you can possess up to 20 ounces of oil here. You get a recommendation from the doctor. It's one of 10 diagnoses. We did not get PTSD and chronic pain last year because they said it was too vague. But, the seizures are covered. We did get peripheral neuropathy, which is a bad pain disease for people that have it. It's just constant. We did get Alzheimer's included. We did get Parkinson's included. So we got made substantial progress. We still have a lot more to do here. Alan, and I think next year the Governor deal, our governor's vehemently opposed to any use of cannabis. He signed the bill because he had to, politically, because it's an election year coming up. So he had to sign the bill because 82% of Georgians said they wanted it. So, you can look at the poll and tell that's a no-brainer right there. But he's not going to be governor anymore. He's served 2 terms, and we're going to get a new governor. And Alan's going to push for in-state cultivation and processing in Georgia in 18. And I'm pretty sure we're going to get that. I think that pendulum has swung. Still no whole plant, which is what we're after. One of the ways we're trying to get this legitimized is through the veterans program. I mean, these veterans, they deserve that, And I spoke with a representative when I was out in Colorado that had met with Jeff Sessions, who's part of the Missouri group, the NORML 22 project, and the president, and they said they were going to be committed to getting medical cannabis to veterans. And they made that announcement last week. But, Jeff is trying to, our Attorney General, he's vehemently opposed to that. So, and with this administration, everything changes every 5 minutes, so we're not sure how that's going to go. But we're not going to wait. We're going to get out front. The American Legion group, they said we're for this, and we want veterans to have access to medical cannabis in the states where it's legal. So they kind of couched their argument a little bit. That's okay. But we want whole plant, and we want whole plant in Georgia for our veterans, and oil too. So we're moving down here. We're moving kind of slow, but we're moving. Florida passed a fairly robust bill, no whole plant, but a fairly good oil bill, and now the Republican legislature down there is trying to dismantle it. And John Morgan's suing them over that, so I think the bill will maintain hopefully most of its good parts. So, but here, you just go to the doctor. It's a 2-page form. Actually, Georgia made it very simple. All the doctor's doing is attesting to the fact that you have these diagnoses. He's not recommending cannabis. He's not prescribing a particular strain. They can't do that. He's just attesting that you have these diseases, and once you do that, you send the paperwork to the state and you get a card, and that allows you to possess 20 ounces of oil here in the state legally. Of course, you've got to go to the legal state, purchase the oil, break their state law and federal law when you transport it across multiple states back to Georgia. But once you get inside the Georgia border, you're good to go. That's what we're stuck with down here, which is crazy, and it's going to change next year, I hope. So,
all the different conditions you were mentioning, like Alzheimer, etc., that you guys got approved, is that like an individual process per condition?
There's a group of diagnosis which we added to last year. But the first bill we had, it was kind of crazy because you had to just about be dead. I mean, to get it, you had to be. Everything had the language of end stage, which, if it just infuriates me. I mean, you shouldn't have to be dead before you get your medicine. The whole idea of getting the medicine is a preventive measure or a palliative measure. Then you should be able to get the medicine first before you're almost dead. Alzheimer's was really a good addition for us. The children made it easy for us. I mean, and because they look at these kids and then they see the immediate effects of it, but with these chronic diseases, here's the list here. I had to bring it up. We've added some on the last session. We have cancer when a diagnosis is end stage or the treatment produces wasting effects. We have ALS, which is a neurological disorder. All seizure disorders are covered here. Multiple sclerosis, MS. Crohn's disease, which was vital because I know a lot of people with Crohn's disease, and it's kind of like almost the gold standard using the oil now with the Crohn's disease, from what I understand. The mitochondrial disease, which is a disease prevalent in young kids. Parkinson's disease, sickle cell is covered. Tourette syndrome, that was the other one. And this time we had a prominent, Dale Jackson, a friend of mine, a prominent Republican. As a matter of fact, he's the district chairman for the GOP here in the 3rd District in Georgia. He's a Republican. And his son is autistic, and he worked tirelessly to help us get this bill passed. And so autism was added this year. Alzheimer's, AIDS, peripheral neuropathy. and anybody in hospice, no matter what stage of hospice they're in, they qualify.
Is it the same application process for patients for all
For
these?
everyone.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Keeps it simple. A question I had, you keep bringing up NORML. What is NORML?
NORML is the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. It's been in existence, I think, since the early 70s. Like I said, I used to bootleg High Times magazines when I was in high school, and I saw an ad for NORML in there, and I called. I actually just called, and they answered the phone. I mean, this is back in probably 73, 74. And so how did I get involved in this? I said, well, you just send us $5 and you can join or something like that. I forgot how much. I think it was $5. And, I got the newsletters, and back then they were just printed and folded and stapled, and you could get them in the mail. And then, after I got out of high school, I went in the military, and I kind of, I wasn't that active with them then. And then, after I got back here to Thomaston, where I lived in my hometown, I went to school up at Tennessee. I started getting back into advocacy, and I rejoined NORML and all. So, and I'm a member of the Peachtree. I'm a president and secretary of the Peachtree Mid-Georgia NORML. We're a subsidiary of the Peachtree NORML in Atlanta. We're in Macon, Georgia, which covers central Georgia. We have our parent group, which is Peachtree NORML in Atlanta. We have a new group in Columbus, Georgia, which we're excited about because that's where Fort Benning is. We have a lot of veterans there. We have one that started in Rome, Georgia, which is northwest Georgia, and we're trying to get our Savannah chapter going again, and we have one in South Georgia, Albany. So we're growing. We have meetings at different places. In Macon, we go to this huge flea market. It's like an outdoor open-air market, and we set a table up with all our literature, on cannabis and medical cannabis. We print out the forms for their cards so they don't have to download them. They can just take them off the table. All the frequently asked questions are there. And we sit there, and people come by, and they see our sign that says free marijuana and information in real little letters at the bottom. They kind of draws them over, we got to leave. And that starts a conversation. So that's what NORML's about. They want to end this crazy war on the plant,
And how often are these events? Like,
how often do we meet?
Yeah.
Yeah, we meet once a month. We usually meet on the second Sunday of the month. And we've done meetings in like Mellow Mushroom, places. And as a matter of fact, I've got to go scout out one tomorrow. Our Mellow Mushroom that we had our indoor meetings that closed. So we went to the flea market, but now down here in Georgia, you don't want to be out in the heat in the middle of the day like that. So we're going to look at some more restaurants over in Warner Robins, which is near Macon's big air space there. So we've had several that have welcomed us in and just want to talk to us. So that's what I'm going to do tomorrow. Get in here, scout out another place. Yeah, the big thing is just changing people's perception. It's it's in the stigma. It's more these patients and these kids begin to use cannabis, especially as more adults begin to use it. I think the stigma's going to go away. I mean, everybody knows. It's just like that little dark secret. Nobody wants to bring it up because it's a Schedule I drug. They'll throw you in a concrete. If you have more than an ounce on you down here, you can end up in a concrete cage for a while. And so that's what NORML's all about: changing those laws and decriminalizing. We've had Clarkston, which is a little suburb of Atlanta. Ted Terry, the mayor up there, they have a large immigrant population all over the world, in the Middle East particularly. But they just said, okay, here's what we're going to do. The council got together. If you get caught with an ounce or less, it's a $75 ticket. You don't go to jail. You don't get arrested. They just write you a ticket, and they take your weed, of course. But so that's and we've got a community to community effort here in Georgia. There's another advocacy group here in Georgia. James Bell runs, called Georgia Cares, and NORML, Peachtree NORML and Georgia Care work together on some issues. James has been an advocate for a long time, and they go around to different towns when they want to decriminalize, and they speak about it. He had a particularly frosty encounter up in one community in Temple, Georgia. People showed up with pitchforks. It was kind of outrageous when they found out what's going on. But you got to start somewhere. And I admire these guys for getting out and pounding the streets. You just got to tell people the truth. If you tell people the truth, everything's going to be okay. The truth's on our side. I firmly believe that the truth is on our side. Cannabis is not a harmful, addictive substance, period. Now, some people, 6% of the population, they're going to abuse something, and that might be cannabis. But that's not the norm. And people just need we have this schizophrenic view of drugs in this country. It amazes me. Everybody talks about the drug war and how everybody does drugs. Just about everybody does drugs in one form or the other. Like I was saying, it's a natural response to a condition. You seek out substances to do that. We need to have that discussion, and we need to make sure that if we're going to use a substance, we need to use the least harmful substance. That's what I believe. Because people are going to do it. They're going to seek to mediate either an emotional or physical harm. They're going to do that. And they're going to either do it with a drug, with exercise, with food, with certain behaviors. People are going to do that. And, we need that. That's why we don't need to punish people. We need to help them gain insights into why they're doing what they're doing, and then they can make more educated decisions about their health. But first, you got to know the underlying, and that doesn't come by throwing them in a cage and disrupting their whole life and their family's lives. That's kind of what NORML's about. So that's why I was drawn to that whole thing. So.
Does NORML have veterans reaching out to them that aren't in the states that NORML's in?
Yeah, the NORML has started a kind of a subgroup. The Veterans NORML 22. If you Google NORML, and the number 22, you'll see it come up. And it's an outreach program, and they also send representatives back and forth. They have a presence. NORML has an office in Washington, so they're lobbyists, and so they have people going back and forth now specifically to address veterans issues.
Do they work with 22 Too Many at all in Washington?
Well, Blake has done, Blake Bell in Missouri has kind of done a pilot program and helped work with them to get that started. So, fortunately we have good support in the Congress, up in Washington. I mean, they support the veterans. If you say you support the troops and you support the veterans and you do not support medical cannabis for veterans, you're not telling the truth. You're lying because you're not supporting veterans. There are veterans out there, and Missouri brought 22 veterans to the conference, to the International Cannabis Research Conference. They funded that. NORML helped do that too, and through private donations. But there are so many veterans that cannabis is the only thing that works for them. Some of them, we met some of them that were on 25, 30, 40 medications a day, pills a day. How do you manage that? And how does your body manage that? I don't understand that. I'm not a neurologist, but I've worked in the healthcare field for a long time and treated a lot of neuro patients. I don't understand how a body can function with that many conflict, and a lot of them are conflicting medications. They'll tell you right up front, and it's not. And the veterans were very honest. It's not the VA's fault. It's not the doctor's fault. They're overwhelmed. They're just overwhelmed. They can't see this many people, and that's the result of being at war for 17 years, or 15 years. And they're doing what they're trained to do. Unfortunately, veterans, particularly veterans with head injuries, they can't manage that medicine, and they end up dying. They end up taking too many, or they end up being so desensitized by those powerful opioid and psychotropic medicines that they don't want to live anymore. Life's not any fun anymore. Once your pleasure centers are gone, which is what a lot of drugs do, particularly the methamphetamine drugs and drugs like that, or even the opioids, they take away those pleasure centers. They overstimulate and they take them away. Then life's not, you can't find any pleasure in anything. When it comes to that point, people make decisions, and then unfortunately some of them decide to end their lives. And I think it's a national tragedy.
I was told that there are certain prescription medications that are prescribed to deal with your depression that you get from taking pills.
Right. Yeah. The first, if you look at a lot of the SSRIs, the medications for depression and all, one of the second or third side effects is suicidal thoughts. So basically, they're giving you medicine that may cause you to have suicidal thoughts to prevent you from killing yourself. So I don't understand how that works, but maybe the drug companies, they move their, they can publish what they want to publish, but and I'm not faulting them either. They're trying, but when you have something that works, and you have something that works with virtually no side effects, just minimal side effects, why not allow veterans to use it? And that's my tack, just because you think it's, bad, and that's it's reefer madness, and then you don't want somebody else to use it. It's just I don't understand the argument. But
Well, Canada's sure taking a different approach. They reimburse
they
veterans.
are.
They reimburse veterans
for
3 grams a day. It's
Yep. And you know what I found interesting? They're debating, and the Canadians are now in the House, and they're legislative bodies. I'm not sure, but the physicians groups that are in there, they want to delineate completely recreational marijuana from medical marijuana. So I started reading the transcripts of why they want to do that. Really, it makes sense to me. Number one, they can, not tax the medical marijuana. So that'll be, it'll have to be separated economically like that, and not taxed as much, like 5%, whereas 20% they're thinking about taxing the recreational marijuana. But the main reason, the physicians are a lot more in tune in that, and in Canada than they are here. They understand the importance of keeping those high CBD, low THC strains that work for, certain patients, and the high THC, low CBD strains which work for certain other patients, to keep those strains, those lines pure, and to keep them segregated from the recreational strains, which are typically the higher THC strains because that's what people buy it for, And so I found that interesting that they want to keep those two systems completely different. And I think it's a good approach. Colorado's done that in a way because I was out there 2 years after, I guess it was 14 after legalization. I went into Lidwell, and I couldn't even get on the medical side. They wouldn't even let me on there. If you don't have that card, you can't get over there. You're shutting it off to a different part of the store. And then when I was talking to the patients outside afterwards, and I said, well, they said, well, we don't have to pay as much tax, and all this and that. I'm thinking, well, that makes sense. But I found it odd that they wouldn't. There was like a line in the floor, and you couldn't cross over. They were trying to keep that segregated like that too. So. And hopefully they do that back in the grow rooms too with those strains. They find out what's going on, and what patients prefer which strain, and eventually you figure it out. And I think that's what drives the medical community crazy in this country is that they're so used to just this pill goes with that, this pill goes with that, and they don't understand this whole herbal thing. It's kind of a conundrum for them, I guess.
So you would say that there's some strains of cannabis that work best for medical purposes, and of course others that people just want to do recreationally because it gives them a different experience?
Yeah, we know that to be true because a lot of these kids that take these seizure medications, they don't require more than 5% THC. They tend that higher CDB ratio tends to work better for them. And it's been a process of really hit and miss. And now we're hitting more than we're missing because that's the way things work. The drug companies, they do the study. That's the way it works. They change. And we're just doing that with a plant instead of with synthetic chemicals. And I think that's part of the beauty of medical cannabis, actually, is finding that particular strain that helps for that. I think that's the magic, And kudos to those growers and those breeders that are out there doing that. I have a friend that was arrested here in Georgia and made the move to California. Grew up in the Emerald Triangle up there, and now he's back to the East Coast because I think he sees what's fixing to happen and what's already happened up in the Northeast. New Hampshire and Maryland, and that market. Anybody growing up in the Northeast that's a good grower, that New York market's going to go, and when it goes, that's going to be the place to be. If you're a grower or a breeder, that's going to be an exciting place to be. I think that's why he moved up there. So I wish him a lot of luck.
You mentioned the 20% tax. Wouldn't it be
Yeah, well,
I was gonna
well,
ask.
it varies from city to city. You know, I mean, they constantly trying to change that. Colorado's been one of the places where they've really just let it stay at a certain rate to see how it worked out. You know, and but there's some places that they want over. That's one of the things they want to do in Florida is they wanted to tax it. I mean, instead of tax, I don't know, it's 37% is what it started out, and I'm not sure exactly what it ended up being in the end. Of course, they don't have plant, and it's just the oil, but still, you don't pay that kind of tax on a beer. You pay about a 1.7% sales tax on alcohol here in Georgia. And you're asking somebody to pay 15-20% tax on their medicine. That doesn't make sense to me. But I guess I don't know if they think taxing it more will discourage its use. I mean, that's the only thing I can think of.
Well, wouldn't it be in their best interest to be at a better price than the black market?
Absolutely. But unfortunately, they think they can solve that problem with law enforcement. They can just go out and arrest everybody that does it, arrest all the black market. That's still the mentality people have. Unfortunately, they don't get. There's a lot of people that when prohibition of alcohol in this country was finally lifted, there are not a lot of people alive today that remember how bad alcohol prohibition really was and how violent everything really was back during that time. I mean, you can read about it, but there's not a lot of people who remember that, and so I guess that that lesson's lost to us. But we should have learned it after this, since 1971 when Nixon started really ramping up the war on drugs, especially marijuana. We should see what's going on, and it's there, for us to see. We just choose not to see that. We put all of our faith in law enforcement that we can arrest your way out of a problem, which is not a law enforcement problem. It's a medical problem. It's a medical issue. That's why these drugs exist. People are seeking to remediate physical or emotional harm by using a substance. And in 80 years, there's more pot on the street than there ever has been, and the prohibition has continued. And then the police got militarized, and because of the war on terror, and eventually the police have become militarized, and this whole thing is, it's gotten out of hand. Actually, it's gotten out of hand. So, it would be in their best interest to keep it cheaper so that you don't have the black market. But they also have a market. They have a market for mass incarceration of people. They get money from that, a lot of money from that. We have a private prison system here in Georgia. It's run by, actually, the governor has a pretty big stake in it, but he had to divest himself from that while he's in office. But when he goes out in 2018, he'll be right back where he was. And they've had emails intercepted here saying if you fall below this certain number of inmates, we're going to fine you. Going to fine the state. Which is, I can't. That's a civilized society. That shouldn't be that way, in my opinion. But so it's the prohibition thing is a lot of worms all put in a can together, and we're starting to strip them out one at a time. But it's going to take some time.
See, I love listening to the Joe Rogan podcast, and that's one of the things that he's brought up a few times is the fact that the prisons are privatized and there's a lot of money in keeping people in cages.
It is. Well, they don't really keep them in the cages. They put them to work. They actually make products that you buy. So, if you look at it and to what, they don't just make license plates anymore. They clean the highways. They work in factories in some states. I mean, it's virtually free labor. It's like, they make 80 cents a day or something here in Georgia. So.
I heard a story about this. Maybe you could confirm that there was a prison that did chain gangs. So they had prisoners out there working, cleaning, I believe it was cleaning ditches, and the prisoners complained that it was sexist that the women didn't have to do this. So that whoever was in charge agreed, and the next day the women were out there doing it. I guess the men prisoners are hoping to get a different end to that.
Well, I haven't heard that story, but it could happen. It could happen. Yeah, the chain gangs are. I mean, that's one of those staples of Georgia. They've been here since I can remember. I remember seeing them, and they still do. They come cut my grass in front of my house that's in the right of way. They're out here like twice a month, weed eating and cleaning up, you know. And you know, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But if you're incarcerated for something, I think, you know, you need to be you need to have a job when you come out. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's like that with the veterans too. When they come home, one of the big things is these veterans, particularly ones that have a TBI, sometimes they will be discharged because they have behavioral problems. So they discharge, and sometimes they discharge them with a medical discharge, or sometimes they just give them a general discharge. And if you get that, anything less than honorable discharge, that's some things, you know, employers will ask you right off the bat, you know. And you combine that with, you know, a traumatic brain injury and then 20 pills a day, and you can see how sometimes the road gets mighty narrow for some of these veterans, you know.
Yeah. That's
But it's the same with people that have been, you know, you shouldn't be in jail for a plant to begin with. That's not a jailable offense. There's no victim there. You know, I mean, just simple possession of cannabis. You know, you don't have a weapon. You're not threatening anybody. You know, you wouldn't have probably known it had something else not happened. They had smelled it on you, or, you know, your tail light was out. You know, all this can start very innocuously and end up putting somebody in a bad situation, which is why we need to change the laws, point blank.
You know, and let's be honest, life's expensive. With all your regular bills, and then, you know, down in the States, these people who need this cannabis for medicine don't get any help with it, and their bills are up $1,000 to $2,000 a month. Like, that's on top of everything else. It's crazy.
Wow. Yeah. You know, so I've read where sometimes some of these kids' medicines are costing, you know, in the cannabis oil itself is running around $1,000 a month. But then you got to look at it, the pharmaceuticals they were taking, you know, then they get a subsidy for those because most of them have drug cards, you know, a lot of them do. And those pharmaceuticals are $3,000 or $4,000 a month, you know. And
But that wasn't coming out of their pocket, was it? The customers?
Yeah. You know, I mean, well, if you have insurance and you're taking a prescription medicine, you know, your insurance is going to eat up, you know, pay for virtually 80% of that. Not cannabis oil; they won't pay for that. So, but the good news is the cannabis oil is considerably cheaper than all those pharmaceuticals. Yeah, I have a friend. She trained canines in the military, and she started having seizures, and they found out she had a little tumor in her brain. They took it out; it was benign, but she's still having recurrent seizures. So she's using cannabis. She doesn't use prescription medicine anymore at all. She's off all of my prescription meds. So, and you'll hear those stories over and over again. Once you go out and start talking to people, you'll hear those stories like that all the time. And you know, you walk around and you don't think, you know, you think cannabis is way in the background, but the more you get out, especially in public and open places like the market, and you start talking to people, you find out it's not so far away. And that's amazing down here in the South. People, you know, they hide that sort of stuff, and, you know, you don't see it. Not so much in the legal states now. But.
You know, it's interesting that you said how much pharmaceuticals cost a person a month, and even with 80% coverage. So you said between 3,000 and 4,000. So 80% of 80% of 3,500. Like, so their insurance pays for 2,800 of it, but they're still on the hook for 700 US. Like, that's
right. You know,
still a big bill.
Yeah, and well, of course, you know, here we pay a lot for our prescription medicines here. You know, it's outrageous. Some of them are. You know, I know people that go home with some blood thinners and stuff, and you know, it's $800-900 a month for a blood thinner. You know, when they could probably take an aspirin for what, a nickel. But you know, some people can't take aspirin, so they prescribe these drugs, and that's part of my, you know, the whole thing about how schizophrenic we are about drugs here. These companies, these drug companies, will put these commercials on TV, and Americans, they love everything on TV. They love a good commercial, and the commercials are, I mean, they got deep pockets, so the commercials are just, you know, they're just beautiful. You know, the cinematography, you know, they're beautiful people. You know, they don't look like sick people, but they need to take this pill, and you know, they're telling them what the production costs for some of those things are, and people will buy that stuff. You know, they're not educating themselves about, you know, alternatives. And the doctors that they go to are paid by these drug companies to prescribe medicine. So, you know, if they're thinking they're going to the doctor to get objective advice, sometimes maybe not. I mean, I'm not indicting anybody. I'm just saying, you know, there are other interests at work here. We have one of our members in Peachtree NORML. She looked up, she has a neurological issue, and she sees a neurologist for. So in Georgia here, you can put your doctor's name in this website, and it tells you what the drug companies gave him each year. And he got about $85,000 from the drug companies last year.
Wow.
US. That one doctor, and you know, so now he has an incentive to try medications, you know, and that's to help the patient. Problem is, sometimes, you know, it doesn't always help the patient, and that's a lot of money. I have people that take Neurontin. It's a drug for this peripheral neuropathy for nerve endings in your feet. They get bad and they start to burn and tingle, and the Neurontin's very expensive. And you know, most of them will take it. I would say half of the people that take Neurontin, it does not work for them, and they end up not taking it because it's expensive and it doesn't work. And you know, but they've taken it for almost a year and probably spent, you know, $5,000-6,000 in a year trying to, you know, get something to keep their feet from burning, and it doesn't work. And they try medical cannabis, and it gives them relief for a couple hours at a time, you know. You know, you wonder sometimes. That's our problem with our healthcare system here in the United States. It's a commercial model. It's, you know, it's geared to make money. It's not, you know, it's not really a health model. It's more of a commercial model. It's run by corporations. It's run by businessmen instead of doctors.
I don't know enough about it to comment, but people I've talked to, I hear the same thing.
Oh yeah, it's very much so. We're a commercial model here in the United States now. So, except for Medicare, which, you know, I don't know if, you know, I have a lot of Medicare patients. A lot of my patients are over 65. But I don't hear them complaining at all about Medicare. They actually love it. I mean, it's, you know, my health insurance, I'm 60, my wife's 50, and my stepson's 14. For the three of us a month, I pay about a little over $1,500 a month for that coverage. And you know, we don't use it. We're pretty healthy, so, but that's the way insurance works. You know, the healthy people pay for the sick people, but that's a lot of money. You know, I think it could be done better, but. And you know, and I think that's a kind of an approach. You know, that, you know, you can use cannabis for much less money, and you're preventing a lot of things and not having to use some pharmaceuticals. But you know, the pharmaceuticals companies, they're in business to make money. They have customers, and they need to take care of those customers, and it's part of that profit motive. But and you know, I really would not have a problem with that, other than the fact that they pour as much money as they can into anti-cannabis campaigns, legislation, and efforts. You know, and a lot of it's directed, you know, to little shell companies, and you know, so they don't have a direct link to that, and their lobbyists do the same thing, and they come up every time that legislation comes up here in Georgia. They're up there. They're the pharmaceutical lobbyists up there, banging on doors, sending emails, you know, just fighting us at every turn.
It's
It's the nature of the beast, I guess.
yeah, you guys are picking a fight with some big players, and it's gonna be. I'm very interested to see how it goes for you guys. I'm obviously hoping for the best for the
Yeah,
veterans.
I have people tell me all the time, you could just move to a legal state. That makes me mad. They're not driving me. I was born here, you know. I was raised here. This is my home. You're not running me off. I mean, I could move to, I could move to Colorado. I could pack up and move to California. I could move. Fortunately, I could do that. It would cost me, but I'm not leaving my home. They're not running me away. I'm gonna stay here and fight. You know. Because,
Well,
like I said, I firmly believe the truth is on our side.
well, I wish you luck, Rick, and of course you guys are always welcome on this show, and we'll help promote your cause as much as we can. Do you have
Well, thank you.
Sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to thank you for having me on. If anytime I get to talk about weed as medicine, I'm all over it.
Well, it's
Uh,
great having you. Like it's very interesting hearing about your military past and your role with cannabis as a physical therapist, and your your involvement with NORML. Do you what's your next important date coming up for NORML?
well, we have a Netroots conferences in Atlanta this year. They're a marketing group, and they show activists and progressive people how to market and things. That's coming up in August. And then the big thing for us is the Drug Policy Alliance National Convention is in Atlanta this year. So our Peachtree NORML group is going to be a part of that. So I'm really looking forward to that. That's in October. Um, I'm looking forward to some policy issues being discussed here. And Atlanta's coming up for decriminalization. We have a bill coming up for decriminalizing the city of Atlanta for a $50 ticket for an ounce or less. And that's going to be up about the same time that the Policy Alliance Conference is going on, so that should be interesting.
You could try to tie them together.
Yeah, we hope so.
Well, Rick, it was great having you on, and yeah, thanks again for all your help with the veterans.
You're quite welcome. It's a privilege. Good to talk to you.
Yeah, you as well. You have a good day.